All right, let's get Phil Mushnik on the line. Phil, how are you doing today?
Hi, David. How are you?
I'm doing very good. What's been going on?
I don't know. You tell me. I don't know.
Have you? What are your thoughts? Did you see the state senator who proposed some sort of legislation regarding drug testing wrestlers?
No, I didn't. Tell me about that.
Okay, it's actually came out today. I heard it on the radio yesterday. It's State Senator Tom Liebus, a Republican of Binghamton, New York, is recommending mandatory drug testing for pro wrestlers competing in New York. McMahon, basically, this quote from Vince McMahon. The drug testing would be part of the state's licensing requirements. So that would mean commission.
Yeah.
State licensing requirements. That would be part of the commission duties then.
But McMahon said that he had the absolute fail-safe test, and then he said there's no such thing.
Yeah, that's true.
So what was? I'm sorry.
It doesn't even like specify what they would be testing for either, whether it be steroids or recreational drugs.
Well, we're testing urine or blood. If we're going to test blood, watch out below.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. This says that this is McMahon's comments. He goes, "We are performers. We are showmen. He'd be drug testing everyone on Broadway. He'd be drug testing the circus. If he's trying to single us out, that's unconstitutional."
Oh God, that's just he's so full of these rationalizations that anyone who wants to parrot the company line can repeat. Sure, there are overdoses in lots of entertainment venues. Movies and theater and things like that, but here's something where these people are billed as the finest conditioned athletes in the world, and yet they keep having this nasty habit of dropping dead in their 20s and 30s. It all goes back to Oregon. Why don't they wrestle in Oregon, Dave? You can answer that better than I.
Well, we all know why they don't wrestle in Oregon. I mean, they don't wrestle in Oregon because they don't want to comply with the drug testing.
For a guy who has nothing to hide, he sure has a lot to hide, doesn't he?
Well, right now he doesn't say he has nothing to hide anymore. I think he used to say. He certainly said that before.
He's changed his position on drugs virtually every week. Back in the Zahorian days, when the WWF doctor was indicted by the feds and convicted and imprisoned, he said there was no drug problem. And then he began to realize that no one believed him. He says, we have a pervasive drug problem. Then it was, we have the most stringent, most fail-proof drug testing system in the world. And everyone bought into that, or at least everyone in the mass media who doesn't look at these things. And then it became like, who cares after that? There was a tacit understanding that people are on drugs. Meanwhile, again, the Owen Hart death, which, in its prima facie form, in its superficial form, was an accident, that got all the attention. But the guys are found dead in their hotel rooms in their 20s and 30s, that gets no attention.
No, there is.
Am I coming on too strong?
No. I mean, it's valid points. It's points that we've all talked about. I don't know what. Do you have any as far as an idea, as far as if you had the power, what could be done to clean as far as at least on the drug issue what to do with wrestling? I mean, would you, as far as drug testing or, because drug testing is hardly fail-safe. We have it in the Olympics, and we all know that there's plenty of people on the Olympics using growth hormone.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and even the Olympic formula, which I believe is 10 times the amount of the normal rate of testosterone, is considered the alarm stage, as opposed to twice as much. No, I don't have an answer.
Maybe 10,000 or something.
My answer would be.
I think it's six times normal is considered the top to be normal. Yeah. So 5.9 times normal for testosterone would still be within the allowable limits. So
imagine that.
You could take low doses of testosterone and beat an Olympic drug test. Which
I've learned, Dave, I'm covering sports 23, almost 24 years now. I've learned to follow the money. If the advertisers, if the networks, if they showed even a modicum of sensitivity, and caring about the good and welfare of these wrestlers, it would get cleaned up in a second. But they don't. It's all about money. Nobody cares. As long as they're making money, they don't care if people live or die.
Well, that's true, and it's also true in whether it be ice skating or any sport, that has to do with, football.
You got it. I was just on the Jim Rome show. We're talking about the proliferation of home runs in the major league. I said, the Major League Baseball lacks a comprehensive drug testing program, and they've turned their head to andro. They've turned their head to creatine. These guys are getting huge. I mean, shortstops are looking like. And who cares?
Let me tell you something about
money to
creatine. Creatine is a scapegoat that people say when they're on steroids. I mean, I'm not saying that creatine doesn't have its value,
but it's a rationalization. It's a dodge.
No. It's when you hear about somebody going, I'm on andro or creatine. I think that's in more cases than not a buzzword that they're on steroids, but those are politically palatable ways of saying it because they're legal.
Well, you're more well versed at this than I am. What I do know is that whatever's going, it costs money to drug test. And as long as the home run has become the essence of Major League Baseball right now, and it's selling seats, the last thing they want to do is get rid of the home run. If that means like getting into their supplements and things, they'll look the other way. It's just follow the money, and you'll have your answers every single time.
I mean, one of the things that McMahon would say is that baseball, and he has brought it up, that baseball and other sports don't steroid test. So therefore, why should I?
Let's put it this way, though. I don't know how many people play Major League Baseball. It's 30-some-odd teams or whatever, and, times 25, times 27, whatever the rosters are. If, say, Major League Baseball suffered, on average, the mysterious death of 2 to 3 to 4 active players every year under mysterious circumstances, it would be a page one story. There'd be a Senate subcommittee hearing the next day. In pro wrestling, it's so closeted that no one knows a darn thing. I mean,
that is an argument that I've made before, and if there were equivalent numbers of deaths in these sports, baseball, basketball, football, it would be a much bigger media story than it's been in wrestling.
Please, but that's the thing that really kind of blows my mind about pro wrestling fans. I'm identified as the bad guy, and I can handle that. Vince McMahon is identified as the good guy because, after all, he's the king of pro wrestling, and they're pro wrestling fans. But if I were in Vince McMahon's position, these people, these pro wrestling heroes who are dropping dead, they'd be alive. Because I'd test them. I could identify an unnaturally produced physique. And yet I'm the bad guy. I have a feeling that a lot of pro wrestling fans don't really care about these people as people. They care about them only as acts. And if somebody dies, a new one will come in tomorrow. I'm not saying everyone, but an awful lot of them.
I was just laughing about Vince's comment that he was talking about, the hell was the term that he used? It's in the article here.
The showman? Showman service performers?
Anyone who exhibits signs of drug use. And he said, if I see somebody walking around with a syringe in their ass, I'll drug test them.
Oh, yeah, that was that TV Guide piece.
It was in TV Guide, sure.
Yeah, that was no.
Actually, he didn't even say he would drug test him. He would say if he saw a syringe, he'd recognize something could be wrong.
Right, but he prefaced it with drugs. Who cares?
He did say that, sir.
Yeah, he said, who cares? Yeah. But if I see someone with a syringe, I'd tell them, hey, you get rid of the syringe. Go do that in the bathroom, not here.
Yeah. Well, he has done the nobody cares. Unfortunately, the nobody cares has not stopped the mortality rate of wrestlers.
Well, he's right. He's right, though. I mean,
but
pro wrestling fans who despise me, Dave, the pro wrestling fans who despise me, they don't really, they don't seem to care about a Louis Spicoli's death. Maybe for an instant. Who's next? Who's next?
Yeah.
I'm the bad guy. Instead of saying, gee, Vince McMahon's the boss. Doesn't he see what's going on? Doesn't he see this guy swelling up? Doesn't he see that this guy's eyes are dilated? I mean, and yet I'm the bad guy. But, you're known by your enemies, too.
We have to go to a break right now. I want to make one point real clear on this also, and that is that it's actually, and Phil is actually well aware of this also, and that is that there have been more deaths in the last couple of years in WCW. I'm not that WWF is that former WWF performers and current, Brian Pillman obviously coming to mind, are hardly immune, but WCW, that's really, their rate is really scary. This is from Daniel D'Angelo, who says that tennis does indeed test for steroids. That's right. I remember that story because Peter Cordo, he mentioned this, was banned for testing positive.
That's right. Peter Cordo was.
Now, who was the athlete? There was an athlete in some sport who tested positive for steroids, and then they let him play anyway, or they didn't. I forget. Was it? I just remember reading a thing in sports.
That would be the World Wrestling Federation.
No.
I don't know.
I know that there's been some weird things. This real quick, I want to mention this also. The Brian Pillman Memorial Show, the third annual Brian Pillman Memorial Show, which is May the 25th. Chris Candido mentioned this on our show the other day. Chris Candido will face Billy Kidman. And also, there will be a match. It will be a tag team match involving Chris Benoit, Dean Malenko, Perry Saturn, and Eddie Guerrero. They are going to wrestle against each other, but is exactly what it will be, like which two against which two has not been determined, but they'll probably decide among themselves.
Who's sanctioning that, Dave? Is that the WWF?
No, that's Les Thatcher. It's totally independent, but
right.
So
I didn't think that, I'm happy to see that they wouldn't exploit his death anymore the way they did when they put his wife on the air after he died.
Yeah, well, that wasn't one of the high points of wrestling, that's for sure. That was a bad deal. This is also mentioned.
But it's a bad deal, but I mean, whoever attacks him in the mass media, I mean, never mind.
Okay. Now this is more on the drug testing thing. It says that basketball. This is from Sean Robinson, who says. Basketball is widely tested, but they don't test for marijuana. Do they test for? I mean, I'm not even familiar with. Like I said,
no, the NBA, that was a big issue in the off season. They do test for marijuana. In fact, guys reporting late for camp this past summer, and guys who are holdouts were all suspect or all suspected of waiting until their systems cleared. They do. Well, it's part of the new collective bargaining agreement between the players and ownership and the league. They do test for marijuana.
Okay, now what about, do they test for steroids in basketball?
I imagine if steroids can show up in a blood test, in a urine test, they do. I don't know if don't know of too many leagues, or you know better than I, Dave, who tests blood.
I don't think anyone tests blood yet.
And unless you're testing blood, you can mask, you can cycle, you can do anything, just about anything you want, right?
Yeah, you are right about that. Now, baseball, this says from baseball, Sean says that baseball, do they drug test baseball?
No, they have to have probable or reasonable cause.
Right. I mean, I know they do. They drug test players, for cocaine and stuff, but baseball hasn't done anything about the issue of steroids. I know that
they have.
An article.
They've commissioned an extensive study. The professors and the doctors said ban andro, and then they ignored them. So they have done something. They've done nothing. But they put up a big public front.
Okay, but they haven't done anything with steroids that I'm aware of.
No, and you know what, Dave? I talked to beat writers who cover baseball, and they say as these guys get bigger, the male pattern baldness is proliferated, the acne on the backs is proliferated, and
sounds like wrestling.
Those are telltale signs of steroid abuse.
Okay, and he says that steroids are banned in all the major North American sports. Just to let you know, technically, based on the contracts that the WWF performers have and WCW performers have,
right.
I don't believe ECW. In fact, I'm almost sure of this, but I do. In fact, I do know not ECW, but WWF and WC performers in their contracts, they are not supposed to take steroids. It's specifically stated. Now, obviously, that's not enforced. But it is there.
What if it wasn't enforced, Dave? What if Vince McMahon said, I'm testing for steroids? Now, here's a former steroid user, by the way. Who knows if he's former? He claims he's a former steroid user. He can say, we're going to test for steroids. Then on the night of his big pay-per-view, his big stars show up dirty. What's he going to do? This is the foxes guarding the chicken coop. What difference does it make if he tests for steroids? You know who he's going to point out as a steroid user? The guy he wants to get rid of, the guy he doesn't want to pay. Then he'll say, "Oh, I'll get rid of that guy. He's on drugs." And he'll come out looking like a champ.
Actually, you know who he'll point to? If the ratings get close, he'll point to the star from his opposition promotion. Because he's done that one too. Actually, we've all been through that whole period of when they did test for steroids and when a guy came up dirty right before WrestleMania and what happened. And You pretty much called it right, because that's exactly what happened. Let's go to Tom in Delaware. You're first up with myself and Phil Mushnik.
Hey, Dave. How's it going?
It's going really good.
All right, good to hear it. I just have a couple questions. It's not really directed towards you, Mr. Mushnik. I don't think of you as the bad guy or anything, so I do believe there's kind of a double standard in terms of the drug use in some professional sports and then professional wrestling. Dave, I just wanted to say I was at the CyberSlam event Saturday. I thought it was a really good show. I was a bit distraught, though, because one of my absolute favorite wrestlers is Yoshihiro Tajiri, and both times I've gone to see him live, he's lost, and this time it was, he dropped the TV title. I just wanted to know what you thought his prospects were in the future. I mean, do you think I'd stick around in ECW for the rest of his career? Would he go back to Japan, or would he have any kind of chance making it in the Big Two?
Well, I mean, Paul Heyman's got plans for, he dropped one title, but he's going to be in line for another, for other things real soon. I mean, it wasn't like he's being forgotten or anything like that. As far as Tajiri, it's like he's one of those guys that WCW would bury and that WWF wouldn't. Although WWF has got more of an open mind to smaller guys now than they have in the past.
I mean, they've been giving like that push to Taka and S.A. Rios and those kinds of guys.
They don't really push them, but they're there. They're not embarrassed the way that they would have been a year ago.
Yeah.
So, if they want him, he wants to go. I could see it. I don't know what Victor Quinones' situation is. I think he's the one who actually has the contract with Tajiri.
Oh, okay.
But I think that he likes working in America more than Japan, which is why he's working in America. But eventually, I mean, all the Japanese wrestlers like that, pretty much eventually they all wind up back in Japan.
Yeah, I mean, he kind of, I wouldn't even call it a main event push, but, over the summer he had the old, the feud with Taz. I mean, do you think he'd be main eventing any more pay-per-views in the near future?
I don't see him main eventing any pay-per-views, but I see him being on every pay-per-view in a solid match. Okay. But not on top, no. I mean, I don't see Justin Credible and Yoshihiro Tajiri as the main event on a pay-per-view. I mean, I just don't see it.
Okay,
it could happen. I wouldn't have seen Taz and Tajiri either, and it happened. So.
Yeah, I do think it just remain one of those kind of guys who just kind of pushes up the general quality of a pay-per-view. Like next month, I read on your website you're gonna have that match with Jado and Gato, super crazy. And do you think it's
they want that match. It's not finalized, but it's like a good action match.
Yeah. Nice.
It's the difference between an average show. If it hits, it's the difference between an average show and a good show. Nothing wrong with a good show.
Yeah, and just one other thing. Actually, my favorite WWF wrestler, Undertaker. Have you heard anything new about when he's going to be back?
Everyone seems to think right around King of the Ring.
King of the Ring.
I mean, he'll be on TV. I think he'll be on TV in the next month or so. And in the ring, as soon as he's healthy. He's torn pec. Kind of interesting, torn pec, huh, Phil?
Yeah. What kind of angle do you think is sticking him back with Kane or would be Big Show? I mean, he's with Big Show when he left.
I got the impression he's going to be back with Paul Bearer, which means he'll probably be back with Kane.
Okay, well, thanks a lot, Dave.
Okay.
All right.
Let's go to Richard in Canada. Richard, you're next up.
Hi there. I guess my first comment is I agree with a lot of what Phil's saying on his drug use policy. I do wish it was tested more. I really don't like to see these deaths, especially with all these families. Some of these families going without a father for a long period of time. I also agree with his views on marketing to children, but I don't really agree with his views on toning the product down from where it is. I don't mind an adult-based product if it's marketed towards adults.
No, I'm sorry, what's your name, Richard?
Yes.
Hi, Richard. I agree with you. I mean, but you and I both know that we walk into Toys R Us, or what, I don't know what you have in Canada.
It's Toys R Us up here. They even have a shop zone for the WWF, which I find kind of humorous in a weird way.
It's not called Toys R Us A? No, it's not a cheap shot, and I apologize for that. But when you walk into Toys R Us, when you look at the commercials that are on WWF and WCW shows, they're not geared toward adults. The whole thing's geared toward kids. You don't see adults walking around with WWF T-shirts. You see children walking around with it. So yeah, I'm not looking to censor it as it relates to adults. I'm looking to have a real sense of reality about this. If they had to choose between an audience of 15-year-olds and an audience of 30-year-olds, what do you think the WWF and WCW and ECW would? Well, maybe not the ECW, but what do you think, given those choices, if they had to push a doomsday button? Where we market ourselves to 15-year-olds or 30-year-olds, which one would they choose? They choose the 15-year-old. So what we wish and versus what is are two radically different things. Yeah, are many adults enamored by the WWF, WCW? Of course they are, but that's not their main. That's not the main thrust of their marketing. You're not walking into a toy store and buying. I bet you. How old are you, Richard?
I'm 23.
Do you have any WWF video games?
Yeah, I have a copy of SmackDown.
You do?
Yeah. Wonderful game.
What is it rated?
I would think...
Not that ratings mean anything. You know, when I was a kid, you told me not to do something. I did it.
I think it's teen just because there isn't, any blood. It's just the fighting game because all the other fighting games I have are T.
But we both know, there's a reason that M&Ms are advertised on WWF shows as opposed to United Airlines. There's a reason that video games are advertised as opposed to, Merrill Lynch.
Well, it's the perfect audience for video games. You got your male teenagers and early adult males.
But I know what you're saying, Richard. I'm not looking to censor it as it relates to adults, but we both know that the WWF and WCW will dry up and blow away without minors.
You do have a point there because the kids are the fresh blood to the market. They need to replenish when either people tired of it or they just move on to something else.
When pro wrestlers show up at a shopping mall to sign autographs, look at the lines. It's 9, 10, 11-year-olds. It's not 30-year-olds. Richard, you're probably not going to go out of your way for that. And if you are, you'll probably be done by the time you're 25. Even when he says the Saturday afternoon shows and Saturday morning shows are cleaned up when McMahon makes those claims, it's such nonsense because you hear them chanting the obscenities in the background. So, and plus they're promoting the primetime stuff. McMahon's even tried to change what a minor is. He says that we put up a warning, 14 and below. Wait a second, is he going to hand a 15-year-old his car keys? Is he going to have any problem with someone having sex with a 15-year-old? Is he going to sell alcohol to a 14-year-old? What are we talking about? So he's carefully shown that, he says, well, we have an adult demographic of over 60%, but that demographic begins with 14 years old. Those are minors.
Actually, the 60% would be 18 and over, because it's 62%.
And what percentage of that, and what percentage of his audience would you suppose, Dave, and you know this a lot better than I do, would be responsible for buying his merchandise? Would be under 18 years old.
I think that most of the merchandise is probably, not all of it, but the vast majority would probably, okay, the meaning age of his audience, average WWF consumer would be 23, 24 years old. I think that the merchandise probably skews quite a bit younger than that.
You bet.
I think it depends. There's certain things there that...
Do you have it, Richard? You don't have any... Well, maybe Richard, no offense, but do you have WWF action toys?
Not WWF.
WCW?
Nope.
Okay, you have wrestling action toys?
Beg your pardon?
You have wrestling action toys?
Nope.
Well, you're a big wrestling... Now, who has action toys? Why would they make toys while at the same time saying that this is inappropriate for kids?
Well, there is a market for action figures out there, though I do admit, most of their toy market is sold for the kids, and it isn't going to, the specialty shops that just sell these things to the adult clientele, with Toys R Us instead of hitting your smaller, big city, comic stores.
There are adult collectibles, but I think that we all agree that that's the vast minority of what those things are aimed at.
Yes.
Yeah, but they exist, though. But yeah, those toys are clearly marketed towards, I don't know what age. Some of that stuff, like the Twist-em stuff and all that. I can't even imagine a teenager going for that. That's got to be like 9-year-olds. Some of the stuff.
Yeah, I would imagine.
Yeah.
And yet he puts on a warning that this stuff might be inappropriate for people 14 and under. Who is he kidding? That's a dodge. It's another rationalization. It's like, but he's not. He doesn't have the exclusive on that rationalization. When all these congressional hearings here in the states, Richard, were being endeavored to put warnings on video games. So you put a warning that it's not for kids. Well, who'd that stop? Kids? No, that was like a come on. You tell somebody, don't sit in you see a sign that says wet paint, what's the first thing you do? You go over to touch it to see if it's wet.
The problem with the video game thing is, and excuse me if I get off a bit topic, because, I still play video games, is that there's two schools of thought, that there was the rating thing, or there's just censor the hell out of it back to the Mario Brothers type thing, which I don't want to see. And, I agree with you, I don't want to see, like, kids playing, 10-year-old kids playing, like, Xenogears comes to mind as a video game they can't play because it's got really deep themes in it, but for a 20-year-old, I found it fun.
Do you have children?
No, I don't have children.
Someday, Richard, you will. And, at 7, 8, 9 years old, and the peer pressure begins, that's another thing he talks about. The man always talks about, well, it's up to the parents, it's up to the parents. Meanwhile, on the other side, he takes out his violin and he says, I grew up without a father around. So one hand he's saying, it's up to the parents, the other hand he says, I never had a father in my life. So he's so full of it on that end. But wait till the peer pressure starts when you have kids, and your 8-year-old is watching the guy grabbing his crotch and screaming, suck it. You're going to say, I can't believe that I indulged this guy all these years. I just can't believe what a fool I was. No offense. I predict that'll be what happens.
We've got to take a commercial break. I want to mention one thing because I just read about it. I don't know if you're aware of this, film, but there's a video game out there. It's not a wrestling video game. I think it's a Duke Nukem game where Duke Nukem is all tired out or something like that, and he takes steroids and he comes back and he's revitalized. Anyway, I just read about that, and one one of my girlfriend's
you don't mean vitamins now.
brothers actually mentioned that to me, and it was also in Time Magazine. Duke Nukem's a video game character.
Oh, I didn't even know that. Anyway, we've got some old guy, Dave.
I want to make a couple of mentions of some of these email things we got here. This is from Joe Nagel, who says, I was wondering with the rumored return of Shawn Michaels to the WWF, which actually there's rumors he might be there tonight, and with his friend Justin Credible winning the ECW title, does it open the door for HBK to make a few appearances for ECW? I think that's pretty much up to Vince McMahon. If Shawn Michaels has indicated that he wants to do some ECW TV, but of course he's under contract to Vince McMahon, it's up to what Vince McMahon wants to do for Paul Heyman this week. That's from Dominic, who says, what the hell is WCW doing with the David Arquette-Eric Bischoff match? Yeah, I'll bet that will do a 1.8 quarter. If this was part of their 6-week plan, I don't want to know the rest. Let's see. Phil says the WWF has wrestlers dying in their 20s and 30s. The only drug-related death in the WWF I can remember was Brian Pillman. There must be a whole lot more. Could you please say who else died in their 20s and 30s in the WWF? It's not so much guys, as far as in the WWF, but in wrestling in general that have died in their 20s and 30s, like Spicoli, who worked in the WWF but actually was working for WCW when he died. Rick Rude was actually 40. But there have been... It's more of a, as I mentioned this earlier. Eddie Gilbert was 33. He was wrestling in Puerto Rico. He had wrestled in the WWF early in his career. Kerry Von Erich, I think it was a suicide more than a drug death. But there have been the proliferation of deaths in wrestling has been very, very high throughout the industry. It's not a WWF problem. It is a pro wrestling problem. This is from Court Bauer. He goes, I've just got wind. It is true that there was a conversation between Sabu and Afa that you reported. There was a misunderstanding on my behalf about this matter, and I would like to apologize to Paul Heyman, ECW, and those who worked so hard on the Memorial Show for passing judgment regarding Paul Heyman and ECW, if there was a willingness to allow Sabu to appear on the Memorial Show. Okay, so let me check that out. Let's see. This is from Eric, who says, I think the reason a lot of wrestling fans hate Phil is because the only time he seems to bash wrestling, it's Vince McMahon, it's the WWF. He does make good points, but the WWF is not the only game in town. Look at WCW. They've had contracted wrestlers die, and it's pointing to the WWF. What about WCW?
I've killed Ted Turner. I've lampooned his Goodwill games when he pledged $1 billion toward the UN to advance goodwill among people. I wrote 2 consecutive columns about how this phony is, he's worried about all the children of the world except the kids in America. Are you kidding me? When he brought Hulk Hogan, after Hulk Hogan was shown to be a character built almost exclusively on steroid abuse, I killed him for that. I've gotten all over Turner for this stuff.
Let me just go through this. This is from Dustin James, who's wondering if the Hardys are going to be.
Haven't I?
Oh God, I have read. You wrote a column on. What was the column that you wrote on? Was it the one on? There was one that you wrote on Turner. Was it 3 months ago? I'm trying to remember, but what was the basics of the basis of it? But it was something to do. I mean, I remember the column very well.
Have I gone after McMahon in a more virulent sense, in a more steady sense? Absolutely. But Turner, I would not count me among his buddies.
Let's see. Let me just see. Okay, this is addressed towards a phone call. I take offense to what was said earlier because I'm 15 years old and I know the difference between fake and real. I don't think the problem is with 15-year-olds. I think the problem is coming from younger kids. I consider myself to know quite a bit about my age and a lot of what goes on backstage. According to the term, you could call me a smart mark, but I don't hit people with chairs or swear because Steve Austin does it.
So who is that directed at me? Whoever brought that issue up, the people in when Dan Rather or someone addresses wrestling, they go right to the issue as to whether it's fake. I mean, it's been fake for 100 years. It's not even an issue anymore. I know my point isn't whether it's fake. It's whether it desensitizes people. That's my issue, and I'm convinced it does desensitize people. When you pitch negative ethnic stereotypes and hatred and misogynism and homophobia and graphic violence to beat the band, I think it diminishes us all at every age. I mean, that's not the point, whether it's fake and whether this guy, and even when the wrestlers say, if it's not fake, why do I have this hip replacement? Well, you have the hip replacement because you're doing stunts, because it is a physical endeavor, and accidents happen, and even when you get hit with a chair with a loosened seat to it, it's still going to hurt, but that's not even the point anymore. The point is who we're aiming this stuff at and the price we pay for it. And, of course, I'm spitting in the wind because I'm fighting a losing battle here. This stuff's getting more and more popular. It's going from, just as sports, as mainstream sports are going from over-the-air television to cable television, pro wrestling's going from cable television to over-the-air television.
I thought that you wrote a really good column. It was the Dan Rather column. Remember that one?
Right. About Mel Karmazin.
Right, where you said that here's Dan Rather talking about all of these things that are.
Well, he comes, he's gnashing his teeth and he's almost on the verge of tears. There was another shooting. At another school, a junior high school, a high school, or we all need gun detectors and stuff. And, what's happening to our children? I'm so filled with anguish. I'm gnashing my teeth. And at the same time, his boss, Mel Karmazin, is negotiating a $100 million equity deal with the World Wrestling Federation. I'm not blaming the World Wrestling Federation for every sin in this country committed by a kid, but where does the WWF line up in these issues? On the side of good or the side of bad? Does WWF provide positive redeeming values, no redeeming values, or negative redeeming values? Or if they can't have a negative redeeming value, or negative values. In my considered opinion, it provides kids negative values. So here's Dan Rather. He's on his knees crying, and meanwhile, don't tell me, Dan. Go up and talk to your boss.
Yeah, I know. I thought that was like you're a network sitting there in judgment, and yet nobody, and for financial reasons, there's nobody willing to turn their back on popular programming that would make them money, even if it was aiming a message to children that wasn't necessarily a positive message to children, I guess.
Absolutely.
Let's go to George in Boston. You're next up with Phil.
Yeah, hi. I was just wondering, Phil, you've been following wrestling for over 20 years, I'm guessing, right?
No, I haven't. I mean, I watched it as a kid, and then I started following it around '89.
Okay,
the Orient thing is when I came back.
Okay, this is a stupid question. I was wondering, you ever heard of the wrestling legend Sam Mushnik?
Yeah, you know, it's funny. My late father's name was Sam Mushnik.
Oh, my God. I was saying to myself,
different spelling, different families. That's Sam Mushnik from St. Louis, Missouri.
I was saying, he must know a lot about wrestling. What if he was like a nephew of this guy? I know.
You know, Phil Mushnik and I know Sam Mushnik's nephew, Irv.
That's Irv.
Yeah.
No relation then, huh?
That's funny.
We both know Irv Mushnik, who's Sam's nephew.
Okay.
Who wrote a lot of articles on wrestling in the early '90s.
Okay. Because I thought, oh my God, this guy has the same name of a wrestling legend like Mushnik, Sam Mushnik.
No, I'd be living off residuals. I'd be very pro wrestling.
Yeah, I'm not even that, but he wasn't probably into was like today. He was friends with Lou Thesz, right?
Sam Mushnik and Lou Thesz were business partners forever.
Yeah, Lou Thesz is the way it is today.
That Sam Mushnik was a very, real giving guy that, you know, when wrestlers were down and out, he made sure they were taken care of. That's what I always heard about him.
Well, I don't know.
He had a reputation for being honest among wrestling promoters, which may not be a huge compliment, but actually it was. Most people were very complimentary of Sam Mushnik, actually.
That's rare in any sport.
Like, the only booker in the past 20 years I've heard of that really cares about is a man like Giant Baba, and he's dead.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's too bad. I mean,
I wouldn't, you know, it's a funny word when you say care. I mean, I think that everyone cares. It's just that the pressure... I don't think Vince wants to see these guys hurt. That's obvious. But I'll agree. Back in the old days, 15 years ago, there was less of a rope, a net, if these guys fell. But today, I mean, you look like you know who the Hardys are, Mr. Mushnik?
I've heard of them.
Well, and Chris Benoit, right?
I've heard of Chris.
Have you ever seen a Chris Benoit match? I mean, he doesn't use steroids at all, and everyone, Dave, you know, everyone thinks he's the best.
I don't want to start fights here, but don't say that. Okay?
What?
You don't know who uses what?
We don't know who uses. We don't know who doesn't use steroids.
Well, I shouldn't say that. But.
I don't want to be accusing anyone. I don't want to be accusing anyone of anything, but I don't want to say that someone doesn't like that either. Especially, you know. Okay, so go ahead.
Yeah. No, I was just saying. I heard about Sam Mushnik. That's all I want to talk about.
No, but thanks for asking. No, my father was an insurance agent.
Well, okay. Thanks. Bye.
Okay, let's go to Zach in Texas. Zach, you're next up.
Yeah. Evening, gentlemen. I have a couple of things to mention. First of all, the reason you're so often cast as the bad guy, Mr. Mushnik, I think, is I don't want to put words in someone's mouth because it's been 2.5 years since this interview, and I may have it wrong, but the first time I had ever heard your name was in one of Jim Cornette's famous My Opinion rants on...
You put words in his mouth on that one. And I'm, you know.
Carl, what's your name?
And I could have sworn he made some comments about you saying things specific about wrestling fans. That he may or may not have said that. I don't have it on tape. I don't remember it.
That was the thing where I think, Dave, was that the cartoon character thing?
I think that was right after the death of Brian Pillman. And
I wrote that the reason it's not a big issue is because people consider, meaning the mass media and the people who are not sports, who are not pro wrestling fans, consider pro wrestlers to be cartoon characters. Therefore, they can't die real deaths. And that got twisted into, that was all over the internet, all over TV and radio and wrestling shows that I said, who cares about Brian Pillman's death? He's a cartoon character. And if I'm not mistaken, and I may be, it was Jim Cornette who said that. Have I been unflattering toward pro wrestling fans? For the most part, yes. When several years ago, when I was writing in TV Guide, thumbs down on pro wrestling, at the same time TV Guide was putting it on their cover because it sold so like hotcakes. The WWF encouraged people and even put up the address to write me mail. And I was writing at the time and I still do, how it desensitizes people and how, everybody's so incivil. Meanwhile, we got about 500 letters addressed to me, and I'd say out of those 500 letters, 450 were from kids, and it was the language and the death threats, and it was so profane and so vile, and yet these people were writing to tell me I was wrong, and yet the mere content of their letters proved I was right.
Well, I confess to having written one of those letters, but it wasn't profane. I mean, I thought
Well, you were one of the 50.
It was well-reasoned and all, but, I mean, at that point, when Cornette made that rant, I had not read your work. I have since, and I have not found a lot referring to fans as bad people or whatever. But I think that
I can, I mean, I got my nephews and my neighbors. They're all pro wrestling fans.
Right, but, I mean, a lot of the publicity given to you by the wrestling companies.
But what do you think of WWF's going to treat me in a fair and equitable manner?
Right. No, I don't think they do, and that's the point.
They don't treat anyone that way. They don't treat their own employees that way. Why would they treat me, a critic of theirs, that way?
Touche, but, I mean, they try to cast you specifically as going after the fans more than the wrestlers, and I think that is why you are seen as a bad guy, because so many people think that.
To that extent, maybe I deserve that. Maybe there is a modicum of truth to that. I have probably, and I should apologize for that. I probably have overgeneralized the pro wrestling fan. I have learned in 12 years that there's no such thing, at least among adults. Right. There's no way to completely classify or characterize or generalize or stereotype the pro wrestling fan. And as someone who fights the stereotypes that pro wrestling promotes, the negative ones, I shouldn't be guilty of same. I will tell you that I have done that, not in the recent past, but probably clearly I have done it in the past. I haven't done it again. I never will. I've learned that I was wrong.
And my other point is something that Dave brings up fairly regularly, brought up in the Bret Hart interview that's going to be running again on Thursday, is WCW's contracts allow for people to have their pay cut in half or be immediately terminated if they can't work for 30 days straight. And if you look at the deaths in WCW in the past couple years, they were either, and the majority of them seem to have been accidental overdoses on painkillers and pain medication. And I was wondering, obviously there's got to be some correlation between the two, but I was wondering your thoughts on that.
If that's true, if that's such a contractual stipulation exists for someone to sign, I'd like to, I'm going to go to law school tomorrow. I'm going to get my degree as quickly as possible. I'm going to represent these people in a class action suit, and I'm going to own whatever Ted Turner owns. It's going to be mine.
What I can tell you
is that exists. But the other part of it is, in pro wrestling, there's a tacit understanding that if you're not on drugs, be it painkillers, be it amphetamines or stimulants, or be it steroids, muscle enhancing or human growth hormone, if you're not on those drugs, you'd better be. Right. Because those are the unwritten terms of engagement to be a pro wrestler.
But I mean,
let me just get to one thing. In the WCW contracts, in the new ones, and I think in most of them, it enables them to cut pay in half if someone is not performing for 30 days, and termination after 90 days if they're injured and unable to perform. And Brett, it's been said by many wrestlers that that the encouragement is, if you're at 29 days and you're going to get your salary cut, let's say you're a $150,000 a year guy, and it's going to get cut to 75, you're going to find your way to get back in the game. And and we know what that is, and it'd be the same way for football players. If a football player was told, if you're not back in 4 weeks in the game, your salary is cut in half, I think that the drug use in professional football would be way up. So anyway, I just want to let everyone, I want to clarify basically what's there. Okay, we've got Zach online. I want to read this one thing. It's an email from Kevin Gray. We've got a couple more I want to read after this call. But it says, I just want to let you know a little more about Duke Nukem. The guy does take steroids, but it's not to become refreshed. when you have the character take steroids, he can run fast as hell. There's also a weapon where you can shrink your opponent, and if your opponent is shrank and then he takes steroids, he will grow back to his normal size. So, anyway.
No, steroids are safe. And in the Super Nintendo version of the game, it's called Vitamin X instead.
Oh, is it?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, go ahead, Zach.
I don't really have a lot else to say. I was just wondering what Mr. Mushnick's thoughts were on that subject, because, I mean, like you said, there's no way that it can possibly not contribute to painkiller abuse. And, I mean, if you think about it, Spicoli, Duncombe, a lot of the
Rick Rude as well.
Yeah,
they were all having to do with painkillers.
Right.
Yeah.
It speaks for itself. It really does. I mean, in Hollywood, one of the analogies that McMahon always uses, at least when an actor dies of a drug overdose, it's on the front page. In pro wrestling, we all, the three of us know, Zach, Dave, we know that it's closeted.
Yeah,
I don't know what the WCW's contractual stipulations are, but again, if there's a 30-day period where you must work.
Oh, there is.
Really?
There is. They cut several.
Work 30 consecutive days or risk.
No. The stipulation is that if you are injured and unable to get back, let's say they are contractually able to cut your pay in half. If after the 30-day limit, and that's to encourage people to come back, and there definitely is, and there's a lot of guys who have had their pay cut in half because they were unable to perform for 30 days.
That happens then. That's stunning. I mean, it's very selective enforcement, of course, just like everything else.
Right. And 40 and was it 90 days, I think, and they can terminate you for. But they basically have that in cycles anyway. But the 30 days to and your pay is cut in half is in the contracts, and there were several major names that actually had their pay cut not all that long ago, including Bret Hart, as a matter of fact. As what I essentially see as a combination cost cutting measure and a way to encourage them to return. And clearly, if Bret Hart had returned to ring action. Because it's, in his case...
Would be in the same place as Masakatsu Fukuda now.
He could be. Let me tell you something. If he was... in the case of Bret Hart, you're talking about over the course of a year, that 50% is like 7 figures.
I guarantee you, fellas, on a blind, I guarantee you that those contracts are in violation of the National Labor Relations Board. They've got to be. I'd love to see somebody press that issue. But as we all know, in wrestling, if you fight the system, you're out of wrestling.
Hold on. Anyway.
Okay. Anything else?
No. Y'all have a nice evening.
Okay. Thanks so much, Zach. Okay. Let's go to Ricardo in New York. That's a really good point. As far as that contractual thing. Ricardo, go ahead.
Yes, hi, Dave. Hi, Mr. Mushnik.
Hi, Ricardo.
I just have a question for you and for Dave. My question to you, Mr. Mushnik, is, first of all, I just want to say that I read your article on the NCAA and Pepsi and the whole gambling thing, and I thought it was
that too.
Yeah, it was. I thought it was right on the money, and it was pretty good.
Thanks, Ricardo.
I guess my problem...
no accounting for taste, by the way.
I guess I have mixed feelings about your views on wrestling and all. I do agree that a more responsible attitude has to be taken in terms of how do you handle the wrestlers and the drug test in general. I mean, God knows that if that would have been done before, I mean, we would still have Pillman, Brian Pillman, and a bunch of other wrestlers among us. But why? I mean, I want to ask you to just maybe go a little further. That maybe because Vince McMahon didn't create this system. He does a pretty good job using it. But the system, it goes back, I guess, to the Indies and all those wrestling schools. I mean,
Well,
it's hard for me to believe that...
There used to be slavery, Ricardo. They used to burn witches. I mean, we allegedly live in an enlightened age. Let me just tell you, the essence of Vince McMahon can be found in his newly formed XFL. Here is a fellow who is being sued by the Owen Hart family in a wrongful death case, and at the same time is announcing that his football league will do away with the fair catch. Now, what is the fair catch designed to do? It's designed to protect players from having their necks broken. Because to catch a punt at the same time you're being hit is to put yourself at great personal risk as it relates to your neurological safety, your well-being as it relates to living and dying. And this is the first thing he announces, or one of the first things he announces, is we're going to get rid of the fair catch, and as his spokesperson said, we're looking for a more visceral league. Visceral meaning crude. What does that tell you about this man? Do you think he gives a rat's tail whether these people get hurt? He cares about his pocketbook.
Yeah, we know.
He cares about how far he can get over. He's become a caricature of himself.
Yeah, we know what kind of promoter he is, and we know what he did to Bret Hart and all the stuff with Tillman's wife.
Right.
We understand that. I just wanted to know. I just wanted you to maybe see what's going on in the indies or those wrestling schools. I mean, it's hard for me to believe again that these people is not telling these guys, you got to take some, drugs, in order for you got to grow up, and you know what you have to do, right? So that's also big part of the problem.
You know what the big problem is, Ricardo? Let's get real honest with ourselves. I don't mean to put you on the couch here. I'm not a psychiatrist or a psychoanalyst.
All right.
The problem with you and so many pro wrestling fans, and Dave, I admire you because you put me on. We've become Confederates, even though you take a lot of heat for being my buddy. And the problem is that we like pro wrestling even though we know it's no good. Even though it's hard we have to rationalize the living daylights out of it to get over on it. We know that it's not good for society. We know that it's aimed at kids. We know it's no good for kids. We know it preaches all the wrong things. And yet we want to remain wrestling fans. That's the problem.
So, Mr. Mushnik, you mean to tell me that if it was up to you, you would completely erase the pro wrestling from America?
No, absolutely not. I grew up with pro wrestling.
Mm-hmm.
Do I think it? No, I've been accused of that so many times. You want the government to ban it. No, but I tell you what, if the government ever took a hard look at it, the way they would look at, any other sport or any other entity, any other business entity that would abuse its employees, an awful lot of changes would occur. David, I just heard a beep on this my phone here, which means it's ready to die. My battery's dying.
Dave, can I ask you a question and then I hang up?
Sure.
If you lose me, I'm going to say goodnight now.
Okay, Phil. Why don't real quick? I just wanted to, before you go, because there was one more point I wanted to ask you about. Am I losing you?
Hang on. I'm going to try to get downstairs.
Okay, Carter, why don't you ask me real quick?
Hang on.
Don't you think that the ECW title has been really diminished by this change of
Hello?
title holder?
Oh,
okay. Are you
we're
back?
Alive. We have electricity now.
Okay, Ricardo, finish up on the ECW title question.
Yeah, don't you think that he has been really hurt not only by what happened on Thursday, but also by these constant changes of champions, from Taz to Dreamer and then to Credible? I think that Paul Heyman has done a lot to hurt his title, his ECW heavyweight champion. He has done as much as WCW did.
Okay,
in terms of hurting it.
I think that, and I don't know, this may be such an antiquated way of looking at it, but I think the worst thing for that title was the thing on Thursday. To me. Now, as far as what happened on Saturday, if they're going to continue to bounce it around, I would agree that, they're changing it too much and it's going to mean nothing. And it may mean nothing right now, but my impression is that Justin Credible is going to keep it for a long time. And after a while, if he succeeds in the role, he can rebuild it. But I think that what they did, they almost symbolized by him throwing the tag team title belt down, and that it's a new beginning. And I almost sense a recognition that what they've done has hurt it. So now they're starting from scratch. I mean, Paul Heyman had a long talk with me last night, and it was like he made all these changes. So Mike Awesome is 3 champions ago, and Taz is 2 champions ago, and his current champion didn't beat either of them. So his current champion beat somebody else, and now it's a new beginning. And he, I think there's a recognition that, he's changed it too much, but it was circumstances somewhat beyond his control, somewhat under his control, but it was just the nature of what he felt he needed to do. I don't know about the Thursday thing, and when I talked to him about the Thursday thing, he said that was basically part of the price of of making the deal.
Yeah, but it didn't work. I mean, no ratings according to the numbers.
You're right.
I guess the TV title is worth more now than the heavyweight title.
Well, I don't know if it's on Rhino, so I mean, if Van Dam still had it and had not gotten hurt, I would say absolutely the TV title would have been worth more than the heavyweight title.
All right, thank you.
Okay, Philip, I wanted to ask you, how much have you been following what's gone on as far as the regulation in New Jersey?
A little bit, but that extreme thing. The great work, you've told me all these great expressions. The great work in that issue was McMahon sending Christy Whitman, the governor of New Jersey, a note supporting her her stance on extreme wrestling, as if this stuff wasn't patterned completely after McMahon stuff and Turner stuff, as if McMahon still isn't grateful that she lifted the sports authorities, the athletic commission's auspices off of his shoulders, so he could do whatever he wanted at the Meadowlands and places like that. They have these shows, these fall shows, Independence, with 300-400 people in a gym, and it's loaded with kids, and the announcements are, if you hear something that's going to bother you, get the bleep out, that kind of, we don't bleep and care. It's, there's real wise guy stuff. And there was the Star Ledger of New Jersey. New Jersey's biggest newspaper ran a front page expose on this stuff. And of course, once it hits that kind of media pressure, the governor and her minions reacted. And sure enough, Vince McMahon jumped in to try to distance himself from it, saying, I support what Governor Whitman feels about this stuff. And he's the progenitor. He's the guy this is all patterned after. He's just, he is in one sense the most evil guy I've ever covered, and on the other side, one of the most stunning people I've ever. He has no conscience. Everything is a work, and he gets over more times than not. If he wasn't getting over, he wouldn't be where he's at now.
I want to mention one thing before we head to a break, and this is a post from Shawn Michaels. This is having to do with, I guess he will not be on the show tonight. This is from the rumors that started as far as him being on the show, and he just goes, I don't know of any return as of yet. I do have a personal appearance the day before Backlash, but I'm scheduled to return home that night. I can assure you that unless someone calls me pretty damn fast, I will be on that plane home. Do not take this as an attempt to buck the system. It's very simple. The WWF knows who they want by now. If they want me for any dates, I'm more than happy to make them, as long as they are not last minute. Don't worry, they know that about me as well. So what I'm trying to say is that JR and letting the fans know that HBK will be back in some form or fashion. For how long, who knows? That's their choice, not mine. I must tell you, it was great to hear that this is a possibility. The WrestleMania Access was fun. I'd love to be in the spotlight again. Let me correct myself. I would love to share the spotlight again. The full-timers are the stars. So anyway, that's basically what he said, is that he hasn't heard about anything, but he wants to be on TV. If you were asked to talk about whether it be pro wrestling, as far as athletic commission regulations, what do you think an athletic commission should specifically be looking for to make pro wrestling, I guess, better?
Well,
for the participants and for the fans.
We've discussed the drug thing. I would make that as stringent as possible. I would make the penalties as stringent as possible. And beyond that, I mean, I had a chat with a fellow. What's that fellow's name from the ECW, which says that, we're not for kids?
Joe Styles?
Yeah.
Joe Styles?
We had a nice chat. He's a nice fella. And so, we're not for kids and this and that. And at the same time, I said, well, then why isn't it 18 and under or 17 and under banned from the premises? I mean, Vince McMahon can say it's not for kids, and Linda McMahon and Ted Turner, well, it's not for kids. Ted Turner isn't even questioned on this stuff. He escapes. At least McMahon is there to answer the questions. He doesn't answer them honestly, but at least he's there for the questioning. But if it's not for kids, why would I turn on the TV set? Do I see 12 and 13-year-olds at ringside? If we ban them from the, like a strip club or a saloon or a movie, an R-rated movie, if they were to be banned from the premises, then maybe they can't sell that stuff to the kids. Maybe, those would be two things. One, first and foremost, for the safety of the wrestlers. And people can despise me, and they do because of my stance on pro wrestling. I understand that. But I'll tell you what, if I were Vince McMahon, if I were Ted Turner, if I were Paul Heyman, there wouldn't be these deaths of pro wrestlers. Guys would be wrestling a little slimmer and a little less cut, but they wouldn't be dropping dead in their hotel rooms. And beyond that, if it's not for kids, then let's make sure it's not for kids. Ban them, they can't come into the arena. It's that easy.
One of the things in the New Jersey regulation, and the thing with the New Jersey stuff that really, we talked about this. What bothers me about the New Jersey thing, and believe me, this is not anything supportive of Jersey All Pro Wrestling or negative towards it. My feeling is that pro wrestling is pro wrestling, and if there is something, and like in the article, they pointed out some things that were going on, and the product probably is not something that I would think young kids, as far as the real gruesome hardcore wrestling, that young kids should go to. I mean, I know that there was an ECW pay-per-view. It was the last one that Bubba Ray Dudley did, because it was Bubba Ray Dudley did that obscenity-laced racist tirade thing on I think it was in Ohio, but I forget the city. But and then you see this young kid right in the front row, and I mean, I felt really, really, really bad watching that. And my feeling is that in the New Jersey thing, one of the things that they're trying to introduce is banning of kids under the age of, I believe it's 18, from attending what they call extreme wrestling. Now, to me, whatever it should be, and I think it should be discussed what is the right thing, it should be across the board. I mean, it should be these things are allowable at pro wrestling or they're not, and that should be for whether it's Jersey All Pro Wrestling or WCW or WWF. The rules should be the same. If WWF does something, if they're going to say that cutting your forehead with a razor blade is bad, it should be bad for WWF wrestlers as well as Jersey All Pro wrestlers. If they're going to say using a machete and cutting your arm off or slicing your arm up is gross behavior, and they ban it.
Not in my neighborhood.
Yeah, it's like whatever. It's like it should be banned across the board or not.
I know what you're saying. You're looking for equity here, which is
I'm just looking for fair, because I see them in the Jersey thing. I think the thing that bothered me the most about all of this is that when you look at the 10 points or so that they're making about how horrible extreme wrestling is, and they're not. Most of the points are valid. That probably 7 or 8 of those 10 points apply to the WWF, and 1 or 2 of them don't. And I don't know which was worse, like the newspaper making a big deal out of the woman who or girl who got power bombed through a table and ended up cracking her neck in doing so, or the fact that WWF 2-3 weeks earlier, however many weeks earlier it was, did the exact same thing at the Meadowlands to a 77-year-old woman who, through the fact that she knows what she's doing and that she was lucky, came like a quarter of an inch from hitting her head on the floor, which would have been disastrous. And they've let Mae Young do things. One wrong slip, and I mean, my God,
Dave, I still maintain that's redundant. I maintain that if executives within advertising companies, within merchandising companies, within networks, if they applied the same standards to our children that they did to their children, we wouldn't have to worry about it. this stuff wouldn't be bankrolled. This stuff wouldn't be underwritten. Mel Karmazin, Barry Diller, Ted Turner, the head of UPN, Dean Valentine, people such as these folks. If I were to sit with them in a room full of stockholders and showed them pro wrestling as it exists today, and asked them to tell me why they favor having this on their network, other than the financial benefits.
We all know why.
But we come back to the same thing. People are selling stuff to our children that they would never dare, not in a million years, sell to their children. Don't forget, Howard Stern doesn't want his kids to listen to the show because he knows it's too vile. But for our kids to listen to it, that's okay.
Okay, let's go to Mark in Connecticut. Mark, you're next up.
Hi, Dave. How you doing?
Doing fine.
Good. Great show. I enjoy listening to you. I want to bring a certain viewpoint to this, so if you'll allow me a minute or two, and then we can, you guys can discuss about it. But I've been a long-time pro wrestling fan. I've also been fortunate to work in professional baseball. I want to bring up some points that you were talking about at the beginning of the show. First of all, you had brought up the point that if there had been 3 or 4 deaths in any of the baseball organizations, okay, any of the teams on any of the big league rosters or even the minor league rosters, it'd be on the front page. You're exactly right. The rationale for that is that baseball, unlike any other sport or pseudo-athletic governing body, has that antitrust, that special exemption that it was granted back in the 20s, I believe, or 20s or 30s.
Do you think that would be the issue, Mark?
Well, I mean, that's not an immediate issue.
No.
I mean, you're right that that's a really unique distinction.
Let me keep going.
The antitrust to get away with murder.
Okay.
But that wouldn't be the genesis of the public.
I think the thing we're looking at, we're trying to define the issue as being right or wrong in terms of the use of performance-enhancing steroids in your given profession. Where I'm going with this is, let me tell you something. If you're in baseball, okay, if you're not a prospect, okay, and that player or personnel director is coming up to you and basically telling you, well, you're a left-handed hitter and you just don't have enough pop in your bat, either find some quick or you're on your way out, here's your release, it becomes a question of viability, and they know the risks. It's the same thing. It's the same thing in terms of a journeyman indie wrestler. Okay, if Jim Ross or Jim Cornette or whoever handles the front office, the evaluation, okay, kind of hints around that well, we like your look, we think you're marketable. However, you're a little light in your shorts, so to speak. It's a conscious point. It's a conscious decision, though. I don't think it can be defined in terms of right or wrong.
It's like that tacit understanding goes to the doctor.
True. But I think that's the way we have to frame it. It just is, and that is.
I would suggest to you, Mark, that there will be a death. There will be a drug-related death as it relates to performance-enhancing drugs.
It probably will, and it won't stop there. There could be 10 times.
And you know what? It'll be on page 1. It'll lead the news that night, and for the next week. It'll knock Elliot Gonzalez out of the news.
Oh, thank the Lord. Thank the Lord.
But in wrestling, which is it's most highly, wrestling shouldn't be closeted anymore.
And Dave, I think to wrap up, I want to give you another chance to get somebody on. My whole point to this is, having worked on the baseball end of things, there's tacit, everybody says, well, wrestlers, they're impressionable to our kids. Hell, Phil, you can go out to the New York Penn League on any given night, go over to Staten Island, see the Yankees A-ball team. I guarantee you half of those guys are on the juice. And they're going to be, because they have families, and it becomes a conscious choice. Well, am I going to take care of my families now?
Right, Mark. Not only that, there was a tacit permission provided by Bud Selig.
That's right.
Major League Baseball commissioner. That as long as we're not doing anything about Andro, and look at that guy, he's hitting 70 home runs. And the inmates, I better get mine.
And the inmates run the asylum with Selig as an owner being the commissioner.
Amen. Amen.
Well, Dave, thank you for letting me have on you and having me on, and I appreciate your show. Thank you very much.
Okay, Mark, there's something that was just brought up, okay, and it relates to something, because I actually just got today a copy of a proposed manuscript, or some of what Billy Graham actually has done as far as doing a book. And Billy Graham, just as an example, Billy Graham was one of the I don't know, 5-6 biggest stars of the 70s in pro wrestling, and one of the pioneers of steroid use in wrestling, and he suffered terrible health problems as it relates to steroids, which everyone knows about. And if Billy Graham, and I hate to say this, except that he actually brought it up in a letter to me, that I just got today, and it was a very, and the basic thing is that if Billy Graham were to die next week, I mean, he's probably, in this industry, equivalent star power, maybe a little below Mickey Mantle. Now, he will not get the publicity when Mickey died.
Let me.
And his life was ruined by steroids. His life was made by steroids and then ruined by steroids. And if there was a baseball player, early mid-50s, who started having terrible health problems at 38, 39, had to get out of the business.
Like Mickey Mantle's alcohol-related problem.
Okay, like Mickey Mantle's alcohol-related problem, which eventually, I guess, led to it. Did that lead to his death? Because I'm not that familiar.
Sure, of course, okay. Yeah. He needed a liver.
Okay, if that was the case, and a baseball player were to do that, I think that the media... Oh, look at Alzado.
Yeah.
And I'm not even sure Alzado was steroids, but let's just say it was. I mean, look at the publicity Alzado got for his whole last couple of years of his life as compared to...
Mickey Mantle was doing public service announcements at the end, telling kids and adults, lay off the booze. Because he knew...
Billy Graham would do that for steroids, except nobody even wants to hear
it. You know
him.
what, Dave? At the risk of sounding horribly calloused and having my words distorted vis-a-vis the WWF, who would give a rat's tail if he died? Right?
I mean,
you know what I'm saying?
I think that's, maybe...
People would say, what took them so long?
I don't know. It's just something about... I mean, I look at the equivalents, and, when you talk about one would be front page and one would be ignored, and that there is a reality to that.
And yet, here's the World Wrestling Federation, here's the World Championship Wrestling. He said, this is the highest rated stuff on cable TV.
Well, WWF sure is.
And nobody's asking questions. Nobody's quite the contrary. Hey, come on my show. Come on in prime time. It's a sweeps week. I need a pro wrestler. Anything, do anything. Come on. I'll bring The Rock on Saturday Night Live. Martha Stewart. Don Imus show. Let's go. Come on, hurry up. It's sweeps month.
Let's go to Dominic in Virginia. You're going to be probably our last caller.
All right, David, how you doing?
Really good.
Just by wondering, when Arquette and Bischoff do about a 1.3, what are they going to blame that on? Just by wondering on that.
Well, I think we're going to have to wait until maybe Wednesday for this, only because of Easter. Everything may be delayed. But,
Monday Night Football.
Actually, though, I would say it's at least with Phil's sake. It's kind of weird because, when I started out, reading a lot of his columns, I would just, be like, the idiot wrestling fans feel like, oh, he's just against this, he's against this. But swear to God, Phil, I can say this, more and more I listen to you, you're right on the ball on half this stuff. I feel
grateful.
It's true. I feel the same way you feel pretty much about, basically, the drug situation. And unfortunately, you have to learn one thing. In society in general, in any business form, almost, you're a horror society. I work for a major hotel. I'm a manager in there. In 3 seconds, they can get rid of me and bring you back. No matter what happens, they can get rid of you in 1 second and they'll just bring someone else in. And that's unfortunately the forms of all work in society. But
your comments, coming from a wrestling fan, your comments mean more to me than any other fan of any other endeavor. I appreciate that.
That's not. I pretty much felt like, especially when certain things happen, I feel like, oh, what's Phil going to say? What's Phil going to say? Which is almost scary, almost to say that, because when I was living in New York, I was reading your posts a lot, and
the one thing that I want to bring up that really, and it's one of the things that's always made me mad is whenever there is a death among a wrestler, within 24 hours, someone in wrestling will call me up to find out what's Phil going to say about it. And to me, it's like, why don't we do something to get this death rate down rather than go, oh, my God, somebody died. What's Phil Mushnick going to say today?
Oh, my God.
I just think,
That happened right after the Owen Hart thing, because... it's like a little chat room for people to talk about that. Swear to God, within 5 minutes, 7 people were just thinking, oh, Christ, what the hell's Phil going to say? Which is, it's almost like it seems like you're the anti-wrestling in a way, which in some fans, you're almost like on a low level, like I'm basically an ECW fan, kind of like we feel on Bischoff, but a bottom barrel, but.
My big problem with people is, why don't you ever write about the bad things that go on? Baseball and
they don't read your columns.
I'm an advocate that, well, I'm not an advocate. I'm a plaintiff that virtually all the sport has been removed from all of our sports as a means of marketing.
Oh yeah, I was actually watching the thing with your talk on the last word for about probably got maybe the last 5 minutes of it. So kind of like
it's been a busy day. Yes, multimedia day.
You've done everything all day. Actually, I want to talk to you because I did end up going to CyberSlam over the weekend. Really, the swerve. I mean, pretty much when they ended up having the Credible Dreamer match. Basically, everybody had, their own thought. Either, Credible was going to run the ball and go into basically, everybody knew Van Dam's going to be next. That's obvious. That's Van Dam's no matter what next. They feel it's either going to be, Dreamer turning heel or Credible, basically having the bell, which from the call you had a couple minutes ago, or I think about 2 callers ago saying devalued, it's a total new beginning right now, and I think pretty much, the card itself was just, CyberSlam always seems to be the best show there. This is my 3rd straight year of it, and they always pull the best show. The only thing I really wasn't getting into was pretty much of all the Too Fats, because Too Cold was there, and he just looked huge. I think worse than he did in '96 when he was really letting himself go. But, wait for you to go right back.
Yeah, Dominic, I really have to wrap this up because we're totally out of time.
All right, no problem.
Okay, Phil, I want to thank you very much for doing the show. We'll talk soon. Okay, and I want to tell everyone tomorrow we'll have Bruce Mitchell on at 6 p.m. We can talk about tonight's wrestling, which starts momentarily.